My stepmother cleaned my dad out so quietly that he didn't even realize his life was on the verge of collapse. But I knew everything, and one little recording could destroy her world. You think this was just a simple family argument? It was pure hell. My name is Mark. I'm 25. And if someone had told me that my life could fall apart because of a greedy stepmother, I would have just laughed. But you know what? It's all true. It all started the moment my stepmother, Linda, decided to steal the money my dad had been saving for my wedding. Linda is 42 years old, and, to put it mildly, she's quite attractive on the outside, but inside, she's pure evil. My father, George, is 15 years older than her. After my mom died, he was, of course, devastated, and Linda knew how to take advantage of that. He was looking for support, and it seems he found it in Linda. Although, let's be honest, she was more like a replacement than a real-life partner. At first, things were more or less fine, but then I started noticing her strange behavior. You know, it's like when you're walking on ice and suddenly feel like you're about to fall through, but you don't know exactly when. That's how it was with her. The turning point was when she just took the money my dad had been saving for my wedding. Can you believe that? I was in shock. My dad and I had talked for so long about how proud he was to help me throw this celebration, and suddenly, bam, the money was gone. I asked her directly where it went, and you know what she did? She shrugged, with the most brazen smirk on her face, and said, "You know, weddings are just a waste of money." When I found out the money was gone, I almost broke the chair I was sitting on. At first, I was just in a daze, and then it felt like a wave of rage hit me. You know that moment when it feels like your insides are exploding and you don't know what to do except just do something? My dad, of course, didn't believe it. He was so blinded by Linda that he might have believed her if she said the money just evaporated and flew off to Mars. She wouldn't do that, he kept repeating like some sort of mantra. But I knew Linda wasn't who she pretended to be. There was a reason I kept itching to dig up dirt on her. I decided not to let my emotions get the best of me and kept my cool. After all, as they say, the devil is in the details, and I was ready to dig into her dirty details for as long as it took. I started with her bank statements. Oh yeah, guys, that was a real show. How about these numbers? Dinners at fancy restaurants, spa treatments for hundreds of dollars, shopping sprees at boutiques my father would never set foot in. And all this on his dime. Each new receipt sparked more sarcasm and hatred in me. My dad had been saving money for my wedding, and Linda decided to spend it all on foie gras and designer handbags. Perfect, right? And then one evening, when my dad was off doing his usual stuff, I decided it was time to give Linda a little surprise. I went into the living room, where she was, as usual, sprawled on the couch with a glass of wine, like it was her personal throne. I sat across from her and said, "Well, Linda, shall we talk about your little secret?" She shot me a smug look, but when I pulled out a folder of printouts, her expression shifted slightly. I started laying out the receipts one by one. When I showed her I had all the proof of her shopping sprees at my dad's expense, her face went pale, like she had been hit by a wave of cold. And that's when I knew. Gotcha, Linda. But you know what happened next? She quickly pulled herself together, put on a mask of icy calm, and sneered, "You won't be able to prove this to your father." Ladies and gentlemen, now that asterisk was a show. You see, just telling my dad that Linda was a walking disaster in a skirt wasn't enough. He was too blinded by her fake smiles and love for fancy restaurants to see the truth. I needed something more. Something so ironclad that even he couldn't ignore it. And then it hit me. Record her. Oh yes, the plan formed instantly. I would set up a recorder and get Linda to say everything she really thought about him. While she started spewing her usual venomous comments, I'd have proof of her true nature. I set the conversation up so that she'd start talking. You should have seen how quickly she got into it. We were sitting in the kitchen one evening, and she started complaining again about how my dad spent too much time on nonsense instead of entertaining her. It didn't take 5 minutes before she was bragging about how she had wrapped him around her finger. But when she brought up my mom, That's when I almost lost it. She literally said, "Your father's been much happier since I came along. Not like with your precious mommy, who dragged him down his whole life." I almost dropped my phone recording this, but I held back. She finally showed her true colors, and all I had to do was wait for the right moment. And that moment came. A few days later, my dad came back from another meeting with his friends. I knew if I didn't show him the recording now, the moment would be lost. My dad was sitting in the living room, immersed in his book, and I walked in, sat down across from him, and calmly said, "Dad, we need to talk." He looked up from his book, but I could tell he wasn't expecting anything serious. I played the recording. In the first few seconds, he didn't give much thought to her words, but the longer the conversation went on, the paler his face became. And then it got to the part where Linda started spewing her venom about my mom. My dad literally froze. It was like all the air had been sucked out of the room. He couldn't believe his ears, his eyes darting between me and the phone, like he was hoping this was some kind of nightmare. But no, Dad, this is reality. It was just an ordinary family dinner, except I was about to put on a real show. Linda, as always, was playing the role of the perfect clav. You know, the type who always flatters, sucks up, and acts like life with her is a dream, not a living nightmare. Sitting there, all dolled up in her best dress, fixing her hair, bragging about how she made something incredibly complicated, though it was probably some store-bought pre-packaged meal. Naturally, the relatives were looking at her like she was an angel, and I was sitting there thinking, "All right, sweetheart, enjoy your last moment in the spotlight." When the food was almost finished and the tension in the air was building, I knew the time had come. This whole fake idyllic scene was driving me to the edge, and just as everyone was about to wrap up the evening, I stood up, glanced at my unsuspecting father, and said, "There's something you all need to hear." I pulled out my phone and hit play. The silence that followed was so sudden, it was as if someone had turned off the sound in the entire house. At first, Linda kept smiling, thinking it was some joke. But the further the recording went, the more her face hardened. The voices on the tape, her own sarcastic tone, her insults toward my dad, her mockery of my parents, it was all so loud in the dead silence of the room that you could hear every breath. I watched as my dad's face twisted. He went pale, so pale I wondered if he might faint right there at the table. His eyes flickered between me, Linda, and the phone, as if he couldn't believe this was real. And Linda? Well, she realized her performance was over, and that's when the real drama began. She jumped up from the table, screaming and blaming me for every sin imaginable. You set this all up on purpose. You've always hated me. You're just jealous that your father's happy with me." "Oh yes, Linda, sure, this is all about jealousy, and not about the fact that you stole money and tormented my parents." When she realized words wouldn't get her out of this, she tried to hit me, but I was ready. Have you ever seen someone snap when things don't go their way? That's exactly what happened. Her face twisted with rage, and she completely lost control. But I was one step ahead. And my dad? He just stood up, slowly, like he was still trying to process the fact that his world had just crumbled. He didn't say a word. He just got up and left the room, like everything he had was destroyed in a single second. And you know what? I realized his world really had crumbled. After that dinner, I knew things had reached a new level of hell. My dad locked himself in his room, and this wasn't just a moment to think. It was the kind of silence that comes after your life feels like it's been smashed against a wall. He had always been strong, but now, before me, was a man whose reality had shattered overnight. The next day, I knocked on his door. My dad looked like a truckload of emotions had just run over him. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, his face empty, his eyes dull. I sat down next to him, even though I was boiling inside. He looked at me and quietly said, "Mark, how could I have been so blind?" Those words cut deep, because I knew it wasn't just a question. It was an admission of complete helplessness. I could see that Linda had been more than just a wife to him. She was like a drug. She had latched onto him like a leech, and now, even knowing everything, he couldn't let her go. That made me even angrier. Honestly, how can a person lose themselves so completely for someone else? I looked at my dad and tried to understand what the deal was. Okay, Linda was attractive, charismatic, but after everything she did, staying with her? Really? I understood that he couldn't just hit delete and get rid of her. His mind was telling him it was over, but his heart kept reaching for her, as if she was the only thing that could save him. Ridiculous, of course. He lowered his head again, as if hoping to find answers on the floor. I knew that simple conversations wouldn't help here. All right, Dad, you're hooked on her, that's clear, but I wasn't about to let this continue. It was eating me up that he couldn't see a way out, and I decided if he couldn't deal with it himself, I would do it for him. I was boiling with hatred for Linda. This woman had destroyed not only my life, but my father's as well, and I knew that to get rid of her for good, I had to hit her even harder. This was no longer about simple revenge. It was about freeing us from her poison. When you start digging through someone's dirty laundry, thinking you'll find something small, but instead you find a whole collection of dark secrets, that, let me tell you, is pure adrenaline. When I decided to seriously dig into Linda's past, I didn't expect to find so much dirt. But as they say, seek and you shall find. And oh, I found more than I ever wanted to. In the process of my research, I stumbled upon her criminal record. Oh yes, Linda wasn't just my father's wife. She was a true pro when it came to scamming men. At first, it looked like a couple of random arrests for petty crimes. But when I started connecting the dots, everything began to make sense. She had done this before, entered men's lives, drained them of everything they had, and then left them with empty wallets and broken hearts. She literally turned their lives into ruins, and my dad was just her latest victim. I started digging deeper. It turned out that before my dad, Linda had several husbands. Well, to be more accurate, several bank accounts she drained. She was a master of deception, playing on emotions to get what she wanted, and that's when it hit me. I needed to compile all these facts into one big dossier that would not only show my dad who she really was, but also destroy her life so thoroughly that she'd never recover. I gathered everything: court records, bank statements, old police reports, even photos of the poor men she had already run through her personal meat grinder. Believe me, this dossier could make anyone shudder at how dirty it all was. But I wasn't just collecting this information for fun. No, I had a plan. An idea popped into my head: make Linda a star, but not in the way she probably wanted. I wanted everyone to know who she really was, to show the world her filthy past and how she destroyed people's lives for money and pleasure. This dirt was my final weapon, and I was going to use it as soon as the right moment came. As I collected all this evidence, I couldn't help but think sarcastically, "Oh, Linda, how far do you think your little play will go when everyone sees your true face?" I even started coming up with different scenarios for how I'd present her criminal resume. Something like, "And here we have our Linda starring in the hit role of How to Ruin Men and Run Away with the Money. Let's give her a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen." But jokes aside, this dossier was a powerful weapon. I knew it wouldn't just destroy her reputation in front of my dad, it would make her toxic to anyone who ever wanted to deal with her again. Linda came home a few days after her perfect little world collapsed right there at that family dinner. She walked in, as usual, with an air of self-importance, completely unaware that she was about to get some very different news. I was sitting in the corner of the room, holding the very dossier in my hands, like someone who knows that a little apocalypse is about to happen. My dad had finally pulled himself together, and as soon as she walked through the door, he declared, "Linda, I want a divorce." And then the show began. Linda, of course, immediately switched into, "I'm always the center of attention" mode. "Are you out of your mind? I'll leave you with nothing." Her voice sounded like she could make the walls shake with a single scream. Yeah, she always knew how to play up the drama better than any Hollywood star. But this time, I was ready. As she yelled and twisted, I calmly stood up and placed the folder of documents on the table. "Dear Linda, what do you have to say about this?" I didn't even try to hide my smile. Her face changed instantly. If before she had been on edge, now she looked like she had seen a ghost. She grabbed the folder, opened it, and that's when the real panic set in. All her dirty deeds were laid out right in front of her. Criminal records, frauds, thefts, the men she had conned. It was all gathered in one place, the perfect dirt. She tried to defend herself, That was a long time ago. It doesn't mean anything now. But it didn't work. This time, her tears didn't have any effect. My dad looked at her with a cold, distant gaze. Tears? Crying? Please, Linda, don't try that with people who have already seen your true face. She kept crying and begging. George, it's not what you think. You know I love you. Oh, of course, Linda, love. Except it wasn't the kind of love you measure in hearts, but rather in bank accounts. But my dad was broken. I could see he finally realized who he had been living with all these years. Everything she had built around him crumbled like a house of cards. When Linda realized she had lost, she went completely silent. Her eyes shifted, and I saw the anger. She tossed the documents back onto the table, clenched her teeth, and hissed, "You'll pay for this. You don't know who you're dealing with." But I already knew this was her last desperate move. She had lost, and we both knew it. I sat there, watching as her life, built on lies and manipulation, fell apart before my eyes. And you know what? It was a sight I'll never forget. Linda fled that same night. Like a cowardly thief, she gathered her things and vanished, leaving behind nothing but devastation. My dad sat in the kitchen, staring into space, as if someone had just told him life was a long series that ended at the most interesting part. I looked at him and thought, well, congratulations, Dad. Your personal drama is finally over, but you're still stuck in the lead role. Naturally, he was a complete mess. On one hand, there was the pain of being deceived. On the other, the relief that this walking disaster was out of his life. Well, almost out of his life. I had to help him deal with the legal matters because, as it turned out, Linda had managed to rack up so much debt it could have dragged on for several seasons of any TV show. But we had a good lawyer, and after a few months, she disappeared like she had never existed. And you know what? It felt like that moment when you finally delete a virus from your computer and it starts working normally again. But all of this left a huge scar on our family. My dad is still piecing himself back together. You know how it is? You're walking, eating, sleeping again, but inside, there's an emptiness, like someone took everything you cared about and left just the shell. I see him struggle every day, trying to get back to a normal life, but something broke in him that night at dinner when all the truth came out, and I'm not sure he'll ever be the same again. As for me, I changed too. This whole ordeal left a mark I never expected. I realized I'll never let anyone treat the people I love like that again. Seriously, if someone tries to pull this off again, I'll be ready. Maybe this was a survival lesson I learned too late, but now I know I have to stay sharp. There are too many people in this world who are ready to exploit others' trust, and I'm not going to stand by and watch it happen anymore. So, yeah, Linda is gone from our lives forever. My dad will probably take a long time to process everything that happened. And me? I'm just glad this hellish drama is over, and that next time if anyone tries to play dirty, I'll be one step ahead. And you know what? Sometimes you have to let something fall apart to build something new.